When she tore the medal from the royal guard's chest, she thought it was harmless. She never imagined it would shake a nation and change her life forever. It was a sunny afternoon in London, the kind that draws thousands of tourists to the gates of Buckingham Palace. People stood along the black iron fence, peeking through the bars to see the tall, silent guards in their red uniforms and black, bearskin hats. Cameras clicked, laughter filled the air, and many stood in awe of the iconic tradition unfolding in front of them. But among the crowd, one woman stood out, her voice louder, her attitude different, and her presence causing tension. Her name was Karen. Karen was on vacation with her teenage son, Jason. She had planned the trip for months and wanted to show him the sights. But Karen wasn't known for being patient or respectful. She believed in speaking her mind, no matter the place or the people around her. As they approached the palace gates, Jason was excited to see the royal guards in person. I had read about them online, the way they never moved, never reacted, and stood with discipline no matter what happened around them. He admired them. But Karen saw them differently. As soon as she spotted the guard closest to the crowd, she rolled her eyes. "Look at him," she said loudly. "Just standing there, acting like a statue. How boring. Come on, at least smile for the people." Jason nudged her arm, whispering, "Mom, don't. It's disrespectful. They're trained not to move." But Karen didn't care. She leaned closer to the bars and began making faces, trying to get the guard to laugh. The crowd began to shift, people turning to look at her with uncomfortable expressions. Some backed away. Others just stared. Karen then pulled out her phone and started recording a video. She stood near the fence, holding the phone high, and yelled, "Hey everyone, say hi to Mr. Sirius here. Look at him. Would it kill him too? Wave or say hi." Still, the guard didn't move. His eyes were straight ahead, focused, strong, and unshaken. The silence seemed to bother Karen even more. She turned to her son. "See, this is what you call customer service in Britain." Jason looked down, embarrassed. "Mom, please stop. You're making a scene." But Karen was only getting started. She crossed the line, literally and figuratively. Without thinking, she reached through the gap in the gate, her hand stretching just far enough to grab something off the guard's uniform. Her fingers clutched a shiny medal that hung from his chest. It was attached with a clasp, but her sudden pull broke it free. She yanked it out and held it up in the air like a trophy. "Got it," she shouted. "Let's see how important you are now." The entire crowd went silent. It was like the city froze. A tourist dropped her coffee. A child gasped. Someone muttered, "Oh my God," in that moment the air changed. The joyful mood that had filled the area just minutes ago vanished. Even the birds seemed to go quiet. The guard, though trained to remain still, blinked slowly. Another guard standing nearby shifted ever so slightly something. They only do when a real threat or serious violation has occurred. Tourists took out their phones and began filming. Karen looked around, expecting laughter or maybe applause. But what she saw were shocked faces and whispered voices. People didn't find her funny. They were scared. She had just violated one of the oldest and most respected traditions in Britain. She had touched a royal guard, something strictly forbidden. Worse, she had stolen a medal, something that symbolized honor, discipline, and service. Jason looked horrified. "Mom, give it back now. You can't do that," he said in a panicked voice. But Karen still didn't get it. "Oh, come on," she snapped. "It's just a piece of metal. It's not like he's going to miss it." He didn't even flinch. Jason shook his head, stepping away from her. His face was pale, his hands trembling. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Then, a man in a black suit stepped out from a nearby building. He was calm, professional, and had a small earpiece in his ear. He moved through the crowd quickly and silently, reaching Karen without saying a word. He held out his hand, signaling for her to return the medal. Karen laughed. "Who are you? Supposed to be? The fun police?" she asked, waving the medal in the air. The man didn't smile. He didn't argue. He simply repeated the gesture, firmer this time. Karen noticed more security officers approaching from both sides. They weren't yelling, but their presence was serious. For the first time, Karen's expression shifted. Her smile faded. She looked around and realized the crowd wasn't on her side. She wasn't the star of a funny travel video. She was the center of a growing scandal. A woman in the crowd whispered, "She's in trouble. Big trouble." Another tourist nodded. "That's an actual medal. She just assaulted a royal guard. This is bad." Karen slowly lowered her hand, unsure of what to do next. But it was too late to undo what had already been done. The man in black spoke softly, but firmly. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the gate and return the item now." Karen, trying to regain her bold attitude, said, "Or what? You'll arrest me?" But the man didn't answer. Instead, two uniformed officers walked up behind her and took her gently but firmly by the arms. Karen began to panic. Wait. It was a joke. Just a joke. Don't overreact." Jason stood frozen, watching his mother being led away. He didn't follow. He didn't speak. Just stood there, feeling a mix of shame and fear. He knew this wasn't something they could just walk away from. This wasn't like getting a parking ticket or complaining to a store manager. This was serious. As they took Karen away, the crowd began murmuring again. Someone said she ripped off a Royal Guard's medal. That's a military offense. Another added, "She's going to be in the news tonight. I guarantee it." The guard, still standing in his position, remained calm. But behind those still eyes was years of discipline. Years of training that told him not to react, not even when someone disrespected his service. And yet, his silence spoke louder than any word could. Karen was taken into a nearby palace office, while her son was told to wait outside. Tourists watched as she disappeared from view. And just like that, the calm of the day returned, but the atmosphere had changed. People weren't laughing anymore. They were quiet, thoughtful, and shaken by what they had seen. Some visitors looked at the guards with new respect. Others explained to their children why it was important to show honor. To those in uniform, and as videos of the incident began appearing online, spreading across platforms, people everywhere started reacting. The world was about to witness the consequences of one woman's careless act. But for now, the palace gates stood firm, and the guards remained unshaken symbols of tradition that no one, not even someone as loud as Karen, could break without facing the consequences. The moment Karen ripped the medal off the Royal Guard, everything changed. A quiet shock spread through the crowd like a wave. People stopped moving, stopped talking. For a few long seconds, it felt like time had frozen. Even the usual sounds of the streetcars in the distance, camera clicks, children's laughter disappeared into silence. The medal she held in her hand sparkled in the sunlight, but there was nothing joyful about it now. Everyone around her understood something serious had just happened. Everyone, except Karen. She still stood there. Medal raised high, grinning like she had just won a prize at a carnival. But that smile slowly began to fade as she noticed the way people were staring. Faces in the crowd weren't smiling back. Some were wide-eyed in disbelief. Others were frowning, shaking their heads. Several people had already taken out their phones, not for vacation pictures anymore, but to record what they had just witnessed. One woman quietly said she just assaulted a royal guard. Another man whispered, "Is she crazy?" Looked confused. She turned to her son Jason, expecting him to laugh with her, but he had stepped back. His face was pale and full of fear. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the medal in her hand like it was a live bomb. "Mom," he finally whispered, "you have to give it back. Right now. This is serious." Still, Karen didn't completely understand. She was used to getting her way. She believed rules didn't always apply to her. But this time, she had crossed a line she didn't know existed. And now, the consequences were unfolding all around her. Suddenly, something happened that most people had never seen before. One of the other royal guards, standing a few feet away from the one Karen had touched, moved. It was a small shift, a step forward, and a slight turn of his head. But to those who knew the rules of the Royal Guard, this was a massive deal. The guards are trained to stay completely still, no matter what. They don't move for jokes, noise, or even insults. But when there's a real threat or serious disrespect, they're allowed to act. The crowd gasped. Some backed away, like he was going to faint. Karen, now unsure, lowered her arm holding the medal. Before she could say anything, a man in a dark suit appeared from the side of the palace gate. He had short hair, a radio in his ear, and a calm but serious expression. He didn't run. He didn't shout. Just walked straight toward Karen with a quiet kind of power that said, "This is not a game." "Ma'am," the man said in a firm voice, "please return the item." Karen blinked. "Excuse me. Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He simply held out his hand, waiting. For the first time, Karen started to feel nervous. She looked at Jason again. His hands were shaking. He looked like he wanted to disappear. All around them, the tourists were silent, their eyes fixed on what would happen next. More phones were pointed at Karen. She could feel it now. This wasn't funny anymore. Something was wrong. She tried to laugh it off. "It was just a joke. I didn't mean anything by it." "Ma'am," the man said again, "this is a military matter. Please give me the medal." She slowly placed it in his hand, trying to smile. "See? No harm done." But the man didn't smile. He looked at the medal, nodded slightly, and then spoke into the radio on his shoulder. A few words were exchanged quietly, and within moments, 2 more officers appeared, walking quickly from inside the palace. One of them said, "Please come with us." Karen took a step back. "Wait, what? Why?" "I gave it back." "Ma'am, you need to come with us. This area is under royal protection. You've violated protocol. We need to speak with you." Karen began to panic. "This is crazy.
I didn't."
Attack anyone. I was just joking." But the officers didn't argue. They didn't raise their voices. They simply took her by the arms. Not roughly, but firmly enough that she couldn't walk away. The crowd parted as they led her away from the gate. Jason was told he could follow if he wanted to. He hesitated, then slowly walked behind them. Head down, not speaking, the guards remained still. The one who had been touched didn't move an inch. His face didn't show anger, or fear, or pride. He was just doing his job. And yet somehow his silence said everything. He stood for honor, for tradition, for something much bigger than any tourist's joke. Back at the gate, the crowd began to react. Some were talking again, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Others were watching the videos they had just recorded. Within minutes, those videos were being uploaded online, shared on social media, sent in messages, going viral. Karen's face was now on dozens of screens. And the caption beneath every video was something like, "American tourist rips medal." From Royal Guard or unbelievable disrespect at Buckingham Palace, one woman in the crowd, a British teacher visiting with her students, turned to them and said, "That's why we respect the guards. That's why we teach history, 'cause things like this matter." Back inside the palace grounds, Karen was brought to a small security office. It wasn't a jail cell, but it didn't feel like a place for guests either. She sat in a chair, her hands folded nervously in her lap. Jason sat across from her, completely silent. For once, Karen didn't say anything. She just looked at the UHE floor, waiting. She didn't know what was going to happen next. She knew it wasn't going to be good. An officer entered the room and sat down. He was calm, polite, and professional. He explained to Karen that the medal she had taken was not just decoration, was part of a formal uniform, and it represented years of training and military service. Removing it wasn't just disrespectful, it could be seen as an assault under UK law. The guard she had touched wasn't an actor or a tourist prop. He was a soldier. Serving his country with honor, Karen tried to explain that she didn't know, that it was a joke that she didn't mean to cause harm, but the officer didn't smile. He simply told her that ignorance didn't excuse the action. She would be investigated, and depending on what the palace decided, she could face serious legal consequences. She might be fined. She might be charged. She might even be banned from returning to the United Kingdom. She looked at Jason, hoping for comfort, but he just looked away. He didn't say a word. Meanwhile, outside the palace, news was already spreading. Reporters began arriving near the gates. Crowds of curious people gathered, asking what had happened. Police placed extra security near the palace fence. The mood had shifted completely. It was no longer a normal day for tourists. It had become a national story. Karen didn't know it yet, but people all over the world were already reacting. Some were furious, demanding that she be punished. Others were shocked that someone would dare to disrespect a royal guard in such a way. A few tried to defend her, saying she made a mistake. But most people agreed what she did was wrong. By the time she left the security office, escorted quietly by police to a nearby vehicle, her name was already trending online. The video had reached millions of views. News channels were discussing it. British veterans were giving interviews about the importance of the guards. Even politicians were commenting. And all the while, the royal guard she had touched continued to stand at his post, still, silent, unshaken. That medal meant something. And now, the world knew just how much Karen, on the other hand, was just beginning to realize what she had done. What started as a joke had turned into something far bigger than she had imagined. She hadn't just pulled a medal off a uniform. She had pulled on the thread of centuries of tradition, and now she was watching the consequences unravel around her. Karen sat in a small, quiet room inside the palace grounds, staring at the wall, unsure of what would happen next. Her phone had been taken away. Her son Jason was sitting on a bench outside the room, waiting in silence. The air felt heavy. The walls were plain. The lights above her were bright but cold. She could hear faint voices behind the door, but no one had spoken to her for several minutes. Her heart was beating fast, and for the first time since the incident, she felt something. She rarely felt fear. Up until now, Karen had always talked her way out of trouble. She had complained to store managers, argued with flight attendants, and even threatened hotel staff during vacations. She was used to getting her way. But this time was different. This time she wasn't dealing with a store or a flight. She had touched something sacred. She had pulled a medal off a royal guard. At the time, she thought it was just a prank, a funny little moment to show off on social media. But now, sitting alone in that room, it was becoming clear that her actions were much more serious. After a few minutes, the door opened. A man in a plain gray suit entered. He looked calm but serious. He had a file in his hand and wore a small badge clipped to his jacket. He sat across from Karen without saying a word at first. Simply opened the file, glanced at a few papers, and then looked up. "Ma'am," he said in a calm but firm voice. "My name is Inspector Ellis. I work with Royal Protection and Diplomatic Security. I'm here to explain what you've done and what happens next." Karen tried to smile. "Listen, it was just a joke. I didn't mean anything by it. I already gave the medal back." Inspector Ellis didn't smile. He nodded slowly and said, "I understand that you believe it was a joke. But here's what you need to understand. That medal was not a toy. It wasn't just decoration. That guard you touched was a member of the Queen's Guard, and he's also an active member of the British Armed Forces. What you did today was a violation of military protocol and public safety." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the inspector raised a hand. "Please let me finish," he said. "The medal you took was awarded for honorable service and active duty. That specific guard has served in Afghanistan and has been recognized for bravery under fire. By taking that medal, you didn't just embarrass him, you dishonored his service and broke a rule that has existed for over 100 years. Karen blinked. "I didn't know that." "It's the problem," Inspector Ellis said quietly. "You didn't ask. You didn't try to understand. You treated the Royal Guard like a statue in a museum. But these men and women are soldiers. They are trained to protect, to endure, and to serve without reaction. They stand in silence because their silence represents strength. You broke that silence." Karen looked down at her hands. Her voice was quieter now. "I didn't mean to do all that. I didn't know it was such a big deal." Ellis leaned back in his chair. "Intentions don't always erase consequences. You may not have meant harm, but you caused it." Videos of the incident have already gone viral. News agencies around the world are reporting it. You're on the front page of several online papers. There are interviews, social media debates, and even angry calls from veterans. This has become an international matter. Karen felt a wave of heat rise through her body. Her hands felt sweaty. Her mouth was dry. "Am I going to jail?" she asked softly. "That's still being decided," Ellis replied. "You could face charges for theft, assault, and public disorder. Could also be fined, deported, and banned from entering the United Kingdom again." Karen swallowed hard. but I gave it back. I said sorry. Inspector Ellis closed the file slowly. Ma'am, do you understand why people are upset? Kieran hesitated. Because something I shouldn't have? More than that, he said. You didn't just take a medal. You insulted what it stands for. Imagine if someone walked into a veteran's funeral, took a medal off the coffin, and laughed. That's what it felt like to many people today. God. Looked like she wanted to disappear. Her confidence had completely vanished. Her face was pale, her shoulders drooped. She wasn't used to being on the other side of power. She wasn't used to being told she was wrong. The inspector stood up and walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. Soon, with formal decisions, right now we're holding you temporarily under protective detention. No charges have been filed yet. You'll be escorted to a separate holding facility until we complete the legal process. Do you have any questions? Karen didn't answer. She just shook her head. Outside the room, Jason was still waiting. When Karen stepped out, escorted by 2 officers, he looked up with wide eyes. She didn't say anything. She just walked past him, and he followed. They were placed in a black van and driven away quietly. No sirens, no flashing lights, just the cold silence of consequences. During the ride, Karen stared out the window. The streets of London passed by slowly. Shops, buses, people walking with shopping bags and ice cream. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. Her heart was heavy. For the first time, she truly started thinking about what she had done, not as a joke, not as a misunderstanding, but as a disrespectful action that had hurt people. Jason finally spoke. His voice was quiet. Why did you do it? Karen looked at him. I thought it was funny. I don't know what I thought. Jason shook his head. Everyone was watching, Mom. You didn't just embarrass yourself. You embarrassed me too. That sentence cut deeper than anything. Else Karen had always thought she was being brave, bold, strong. But now she realized that she had simply been loud. Her son had seen all of it. The shame she felt was worse than any punishment. Later, the holding facility, Karen was given a temporary room and told to wait. It wasn't a prison cell, but it wasn't comfortable either. A basic bed, a chair, a table, and a small bathroom. She wasn't treated like a criminal, but she wasn't treated like a guest either. And during those long hours of waiting, she began to remember things she had never paid attention to before. She remembered the way the guard had stood, straight and silent even as she mocked him. She remembered the look on the tourists' faces, especially the ones who looked heartbroken. She remembered Jason's voice, soft and ashamed. Most of all, she remembered the silence that fell after she ripped off the medal, how powerful it was. That silence had said everything. In those quiet moments, Karen began to understand. She started to see how one careless action could hurt people, not just in the moment, but far beyond it. She started to feel the weight of that medal, not the medal itself, but what it represented. She thought about the guard. What kind of man could stand in silence, without moving, even when insulted? What kind of strength did that take? What had he seen during his military service? What had he gone through to earn that medal? And she had taken it like it was a game. Tears came to her eyes, but there was no one to see them. For the first time, Karen wasn't the loudest voice in the room. There was no room full of people to argue with, no audience to win, just silence. And truth, and sometimes truth is the loudest sound of all. By the time the door opened again, hours later, Karen was no longer the same woman who had stood laughing at the palace gates. Something had changed inside her, though she still didn't know what her punishment would be. She knew one thing clearly. She had made a terrible mistake. And now, she was ready to face it. Karen sat quietly in the holding room. Her hands rested on her lap, her back slightly hunched, and her eyes fixed on the plain wall in front of her.
Hours had passed, but she didn't know how many.
There was no clock, and no one came in except a guard who silently brought her water. The silence was loud, filled the room, pressing on her from all sides. She was not used to this. She was used to talking, shouting, arguing. But here her words didn't matter. And slowly her thoughts had started to change. She kept replaying everything in her head. The crowd gasping. The guard not moving. Jason's eyes filled with disappointment. The moment when she held the medal in her hand and thought it was funny. She couldn't believe how far things had gone. She had never felt so small, so helpless. And now, she waited for someone to tell her what would happen next. Then, something unexpected happened. The door opened slowly, and a man stepped inside. He wasn't in a police uniform, and he wasn't wearing a suit like the investigators before. He wore a navy blue coat, his posture straight and commanding. His face was calm but serious. He had sharp eyes, silver at the temples, and an air of quiet authority. Karen had no idea who he was, but the way the guards outside the door stood straight when he passed told her everything she needed to know. He was someone important. The man pulled a chair and sat across from her. For a few moments, he didn't speak. He just looked at her like he was trying to understand the kind of person she was. Karen, unsure what to say, spoke first. "Are you here to charge me?" The man didn't answer right away. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and calm. "I'm not a police officer. My name is Commander Albridge, the Royal Guard liaison to the palace, and a former commanding officer for the Queen's ceremonial unit." Karen blinked, unsure what that meant. The name sounded powerful. The voice sounded calm, but firm. She had no idea why he was here or what he wanted, but suddenly she felt nervous again. "I came to talk," continued. "Not to shout, not to punish, just to talk." "May I?" Karen nodded slowly. "Okay." He looked at her carefully. "I do." "You know what the Royal Guard represents?" Karen sighed. "I guess soldiers, ceremony, tourists." He tilted his head slightly. "That's the surface. But it goes deeper than that. Those guards, those young men and women who stand outside without blinking, have a history older than most countries. They are not actors in costumes. Are soldiers who have earned their post through discipline, loyalty, and years of service. Every medal they wear is a piece of that journey. The one you took, the one you laughed about, that was awarded after a mission where the Guard saved 2 of his fellow soldiers during a Taliban ambush. He almost died. He was 22 years old. Karen's heart skipped a beat. Commander Albridge continued, his voice softer now. He came back home with scars, both seen and unseen. He stood at his friend's funeral. He watched a flag get folded and handed to a crying mother. And after all of that, he stood straight outside the palace, not because he had to, but because he chose to honor what the uniform stands for. And you, he stopped himself, then continued, you ripped that medal off his chest like it was a joke. Karen felt her throat tighten. Her eyes watered, but she didn't cry. Not yet. I didn't know, she whispered. No one told me. Commander Albridge leaned forward slightly. No one has to tell you not to steal. No one has. To tell you to respect people who serve? That should come from inside. Karen looked down. I was trying to be funny. I didn't think it mattered. You weren't the only one watching, the commander said. Hundreds of people saw you. Some were children, some were veterans. One man in the crowd was the father of a royal guard who died in training. Was visiting that day to pay quiet tribute to his son. Saw you laugh at that tribute. Karen finally broke. Tears ran down her cheeks. Her voice trembled. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I believe you, Albridge said. But intention is only part of the story. What we do, what we choose, creates consequences. You may not have meant to disrespect the guard, but the damage is done. Silence. Hung in the room again, but this time it was heavy with emotion. I didn't think it would go this far, Karen said. No one ever does, Albridge replied. Karen wiped her eyes. What happens now? That depends, the commander said, leaning back. Right now, you're not being charged with a criminal offense. Not yet. But we are watching how you respond. If you choose to blame others, make excuses, or pretend it wasn't serious, then yes, you will face charges. You could be banned, fined, or even prosecuted. Karen nodded slowly, but he said carefully, if you understand what you did. If you accept responsibility and show that you've truly learned something, we might consider a public statement and a formal apology to the guard and the service. It won't erase what happened, but it may begin to heal it. Karen looked up at him. Would that really help? Albridge gave her a small nod. The soldier you disrespected? He said he doesn't want revenge, just wants people to understand. What the uniform means, if you help others understand by accepting your mistake, it may give this moment a new purpose. Karen sat quietly, thinking. Her whole life, she had argued with people, defended herself, made every situation about her rights. But this wasn't about her anymore. It was about respect. And maybe, for once, she needed to listen instead of talk. I want to do that, she said. I want to make it right. I'll apologize. I'll say everything. I just want people to. No, I didn't mean to disrespect him, Albridge stood. Words must be followed by actions. You'll have that chance. Use it wisely. He walked to the door but stopped before leaving. You're not the first person to make a mistake, Karen. But few people are given the chance to turn their mistake into something meaningful. Don't waste that chance. He left, and the door closed behind him. Karen sat alone again, but something had changed inside her. This wasn't just about escaping trouble anymore. This was about facing it, understanding it, and doing something right for the first time in a long time. Later that evening, she was allowed to call Jason. He had been waiting at the embassy, confused and worried. When she heard his voice, she cried again, but this time they were tears of relief. I'm sorry, she told him, for everything. Jason didn't say anything for a moment. Then softly he said, I'm glad you're okay. And for Karen, those words meant everything. What started as a joke had turned into a storm. But now, she had a choice to stay the same or to become someone better. And for the first time, she wanted to be better. Karen's story had spread far and wide by the time she was allowed to leave the royal holding facility. Videos of her grabbing the medal off the royal guard had already gone viral online. People from different countries were sharing their opinions. News channels, newspapers, and social media platforms were filled with comments. Some people were furious and demanded punishment. Others were confused or simply shocked. But one thing was clear. Karen was now known all over the world for the wrong reason. She stepped out of the building with her son Jason, who had been waiting quietly for hours. He didn't say anything, just handed her a bottle of water and helped her get into a waiting car. There were no reporters, no shouting crowds. It was quiet, but the silence carried a different weight now. The kind of silence that came with deep thinking and regret as the car drove away from the palace grounds. Karen leaned her head against the window. She watched the streets of London pass by slowly. People were walking around, smiling, shopping, talking, living their normal lives. But for her, nothing felt normal anymore. She had made a mistake that couldn't be erased. And no matter how much she wished to go back in time, the moment was already out there, frozen in thousands of videos, watched by millions. Jason finally spoke. His voice was soft but firm. Mom, what are you going to do now? Karen sighed. I don't know, but I know I have to make it right. They stayed in a hotel near the embassy that night. Karen didn't sleep much. She kept thinking about the guard, the medal, and Commander Albridge's words. She didn't want to hide anymore. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like blaming others. She didn't feel like yelling, arguing, or trying to prove she was right. She just wanted to take responsibility. The next morning, she made a decision. She called the contact number she had been given and told them she wanted to give a public apology, not something forced or fake, but real and honest. She wanted to speak to the press, not to defend herself, but to say sorry. She wanted people to understand that she had changed, that she deeply regretted what she had done. The palace officials agreed under strict conditions. She would not be allowed to speak freely on television shows or use the moment for fame. She could make a one-time statement through a trusted media channel, approved by the royal security team. Karen didn't argue. She accepted every condition. This wasn't about her image anymore. It was about facing her mistake. A few days later, she stood in front of a camera. No fancy clothes, no makeup, no cheering crowd. Just Karen, wearing a plain outfit, sitting in a simple room. The cameras started rolling. The interviewer asked her to speak from the heart. Karen took a deep breath. Her hands trembled a little, but her voice was steady. "My name is Karen," she said. "Came to London with my son for a vacation. I made a terrible mistake that I will regret for the rest of my life. I disrespected a royal guard. I pulled a medal from his uniform. I thought I was being funny. I thought it was harmless, but I was wrong." She paused, her voice growing softer. "That medal was not mine to touch. It was earned through bravery and sacrifice. I didn't know the story behind it, but I should have respected it anyway. That guard stood with pride and silence, and I mocked that silence. I hurt people who serve with honor. I embarrassed my country, and I embarrassed my son." A tear slid down her cheek, but she continued. "I want to say sorry to the soldier I disrespected. I want to say sorry to the Royal Guard, to veterans everywhere, to every person who watched that video and felt pain or anger. I was wrong, and I take full responsibility." She paused again, looked directly into the camera. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to say that I've learned something important. Respect is not just a word. It's shown in how we treat others, even when we don't know their story, especially then." Her statement was later broadcast by several major networks. People around the world watched it. Some still criticized her. But many noticed that her tone was different. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't blaming. She looked like someone who had finally understood what respect meant. The Royal Guard. Jail guard she had disrespected never gave a personal comment to the media. But palace officials confirmed that he appreciated the apology. He returned to duty soon after, still standing with the same calm and strength, unaffected on the surface, but perhaps quietly satisfied that the truth of his medal had been honored in the end. Karen, on the other hand, faced legal consequences. She was fined and banned from entering the United Kingdom for 5 years. She accepted the punishment without a fight. She said it was fair, and that she hoped it would remind others to be more respectful when visiting other cultures. Back home, things were difficult at first. Some friends and family avoided her. Online, strangers continued to leave harsh comments, but Karen didn't hide. She didn't delete her social media accounts or try to explain herself endlessly. Instead, she used her experience to speak at schools and public events, not as a hero, but as someone who had learned a painful lesson the hard way. She talked about respect, about listening, about thinking before acting. She told students, "You don't have to wear a uniform to show respect. You show it by what you do, what you say, and how you treat others." Surprisingly, many people started to listen. Jason stood by her side through it all. Their relationship had been shaken, but over time it grew stronger. He saw his mother change, really change. Not just on the outside, but inside. She became quieter, more thoughtful. She didn't shout at waiters anymore or complain about small things. She began to listen more, ask questions, and say thank you more often. One day, a teacher from a local school told Karen, "Your story scared my students, but it also taught them something real. Thank you." Karen smiled and nodded. That simple thank you meant more to her now than all the arguments she had won before. Years later, when her ban ended, she was invited back to London, not by the palace, but by a museum that wanted her to speak at an event on global travel and cultural respect. She stood at the back of the museum quietly, watching people look at military medals displayed behind glass. One child pointed to a medal and asked, "What's this for, Mom?" The mother replied, "That's given to soldiers who risk their lives." Karen closed her eyes for a second. She remembered the weight of the medal in her hand, not the medal, but the meaning behind it. She never touched another uniform again, but she carried the lesson with her for the rest of her life. And sometimes, the most powerful change comes not from being right, but from realizing you were wrong.